Hello, friends. I'm back again with a brand new episode of Bala and Bala Perspectives on Education. And here I have with me both the Balas who have been joining me in this particular series that we have had, many episodes that we have completed so far. All of them very interesting topics, at least I personally feel so. Do let us know what you feel about it. For now, let me introduce both of them to you and then let's get into today's discussion. I have with me Mr. G. Balasubramanian. Does not need a lot of introduction, but he's better known for the role he formerly played, that is Director Academics of CBSE. Thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Thank you.
And on my right here, I have with me Giri Balasubramaniam, better known as Big Brain, and he is better known for the quizmaster role that he plays, I think, almost every other day, I guess. That is the number of shows that he has in a year. Thank you so much for joining us, Big Brain. All right, so today's topic of discussion is something that all the teachers and all the schools and educators have been talking about from the time the schools have opened up after the pandemic. Learning gap. This has been a hot topic of discussion for a long, long time now. But today, what we are going to discuss is learning gap a new phenomenon? Or are we making it out to be a new phenomenon? Has it been existing for a long time and have we just woken up to it now? What has actually happened with learning gap? So let's start with the discussion here today. So my first question would be directed to you. What do we really mean by learning gap? And is it universal or is it specific to each child?
Well, that's a very important question because that appears to be the hot topic of the day, and especially the post COVID situation when the schools are being closed for nearly a year plus, and the students did not have the opportunity of learning from the school, from the formal system. People claim that that is a learning gap. Technically speaking, there can never be a learning gap for the reason learning is a continuous phenomena, and so long the brain is engaged and active, some kind of learning is taking place or the other, which is very characteristic to the individual. But what people normally refer to as learning gap is what they expect somebody to learn and what they have not learned. I think, therefore, the idea of learning gap is to me thrust by a third party over yes, an individual or a system. Okay. Nevertheless, learning gap is a phenomena that is inbuilt into the dynamics of a vibrant society. Because when the society is vibrant, when the knowledge flow takes place, when the skills are changing, the learning has to be a continuous phenomena. And there people find that either they don't have an opportunity to learn, they don't have time to learn, or they don't have the resources to learn, and they suffer from the so-called learning gap. So we have to be extremely careful in defining what a learning gap is all about. At the same time, we should not press a panic button through using this word learning gap, because gap can be easily filled by people in a very short period of time, or depending upon a need. Thirdly, you will also find that learning gap is contextual, geographical, cultural, because every society, every community has certain goals and objectives with regard to their learning, and that to a migrant to that society, it may be a want, and therefore people might feel that that is a learning gap. So, learning gap has to be seen more in a what do you call with the idea of the learnability of the learner, right? If the learnability of the learner is good, the learning gap can be easily fixed in short time. So I think the treatment to this particular word has got to be more broad based.
All right. What do you have to add to it? And could you also touch upon, is it a universal phenomenon or is it unique to every child?
So I think fundamentally there is no clarity or unanimity on the definition of learning gap. Some people look at learning gap as the variance in the level of learning or understanding. Now, that has existed for time immemorial.
Correct.
In every class, in every subject, in every sphere, there has been a variance in level of understanding. Now, what people, at least from the media side, etc., were trying to describe as a learning gap was an interruption in the formal learning process, which means there was a gap between the time the child attended a formal school and would re attend a formal school. Now, in that learning gap, has there been a loss of learning?
So,
That is the question we are actually trying to address through a learning gap. I personally believe yes and no. Yes, in certain formal structured ways of imparting education, there has been probably a loss. In some cases where technology could not reach the children, etc., and things like that, there has been a loss. But in the process, the whole world has learned how to learn by themselves. Self learning has increased in the last 2 years than it was probably in the last 2 decades.
Correct. Yes.
Children have learned on their own. Nobody went and taught them how to get onto Zoom. Nobody knew Zoom before the pandemic happened.
true.
Nobody knew Google Meet. Teachers have learned far more PowerPoint in the last 2 years than they would have in a formal environment. So, a lot of learning has happened in this gap. So, I think we should not overdo this.
Sure.
My fear and genuine fear for schools is, for God's sake, don't go in and now try to teach 3 years of syllabus in 1 year. Don't do that. I mean, it's fine. There is only that amount of absorption that can happen. So that's the fear that I would like to share in the context of learning gap.
So, do we agree that learning gap is not a new phenomenon, or do you have something else to talk about it?
So, like I said, I mean, if you are defining learning gap as the variance in learning, then it is an age-old phenomenon. Interruptions have happened. When the wars have happened in the world, there have been interruptions. When pandemics have happened, there have been interruptions. When plague happened, there were interruptions. It is not a new phenomenon.
So,
Yes, I mean, rightly as he said, is both yes and no.
Yeah.
okay, so it's more like I think we have probably made it to be way larger than what it is. While yes, we understand that it can be a little scary that students don't recall what they've learned for the past year or more than that, but that doesn't mean they can't relearn it and probably progress with their education.
Yeah, see, basically, I think the one of the fundamental operatives in a society is fear, right? And to me, the learning gap is born out of the fear of a society or a community that we might miss this, we might not get it, our children may not be able to do that. So these are built on assumptions rather than realities, right? So, given the opportunity for the children to learn what has been lost, I think it's only a matter of days or months or hours that they will fill it up. I think, as I said in the beginning, we should not press the panic button.
All right. Um,
I have a point to add.
yeah, go ahead.
I do not want to sound like a cynic, or I don't want to sound like a critic. But quite honestly, there are two communities of people who play out these things more. One is the community of people who propagate this fear that there is a loss in learning, etc., who see an opportunity in that loss.
True.
They clearly see an opportunity in that loss, so they want it to be pronounced as a big loss. The second is people who seek an excuse to explain why they are where they are. Both these people will play it out and say it's a very big thing. My view is simple. What has happened has happened. You cannot turn the clock backwards by 2 years and set it right. All you got to address is what can be done and not keep ruining about what could not be done. It's as simple as that. And that's the mindset schools require. Just move forward.
All right.
True.
Do not press the panic button and move forward. I think these are the two learnings that we take away from this particular talk. But, sir, tell me, do all learning gaps require interventions? First of all, are there different types of learning gaps, and do all of them require interventions?
Yes, learning gaps are several types of learning gaps are there. For example, that technology has ushered in a kind of a learning gap between what do you call digital natives and digital immigrants, we call them. That's one aspect of that. The second, the rural and the urban has created another kind of learning gap because of lack of access to knowledge and others. Then the global and the local also has created a mythical learning gap that something is better in the other place and not here over there. So you could say that the between any two individuals also there is a learning gap because of the neural competencies of the people. So we can define learning gaps in several ways as suits us as is convenient to either create a fear or to market something. Okay, in both ways it operates over that. So to me, that gives an opportunity for the individual learner to be a continuous learner. So I look at it as a positive, with a positive note that gives an opportunity for us to stay put on the learning curve as a continuous empowered individual. Right? To me, filling up a learning gap is just a process of empowerment. And I think so long we are alive, so long we are in a process of growth, the learning gaps will continue because any growth process is indicative of a gap, and therefore it will continue and we will continue to learn. And I think either we learn from direct sources or indirect sources, either through what you call paid institutional method or through self-learning methods. But the learning is a continuous phenomena immaterial of the quality and the quantum of the gap.
But do you think all of them require specific interventions?
Uh, Technically speaking, it should be decided by the individual in the context in which he is placed. For example, if somebody asks you, do you need to know artificial intelligence and augmented reality? Now, I would say yes, as a person who has to be part of the futurist society. But then I have a question, what am I going to do with artificial intelligence and augmented reality when I am not directly involved in that job? So, certain basic knowledge is required. So, expertise, lack of expertise is not an indicative of a learning gap. Lack of knowledge may be a learning gap, but not a lack of expertise. That's my view.
All right. What about you?
See, I look at intervention being required depending on what your goal is. Now, for example, take a typical Indian scenario where examination becomes a big goal. And more often than not, unfortunately, our system works backwards from the examination and not towards learning.
Yeah.
You should actually be working towards learning, and in the process, you are testing whether the learning is happening. But that's not really how we do it. We do it backwards and say, here is the examination, here is the subject, here is the objective or target. I have heard, and I shudder to hear this when I go to schools, when principals have told me, sir, they have increased my target for average score of the school. I am amazed if school principals can put a system in place where they can commit saying, this year my batch will produce average 90% result. I mean, how do you do that? But ironically, there are subscribers to that system and the pressure gets built around it. Take a sportsman. Supposing there is a technical gap in the way the person is batting or the person is running, intervention is required.
True.
Intervention is required. If a singer is singing at the wrong octave, an intervention is required. Someone needs to coach them, train them, correct them, and say this is requiring a correction. That could be the reason of a learning gap. They may not have consciously made that mistake, but while learning, there may have been a gap in the learning. So there are areas where intervention is required. There are areas where learning happens when you don't intervene. Sometimes with our schools, just allow the teachers to handle the children the way they do and keep the parents away, learning will happen sometimes. See, parental panic sometimes intervenes into the learning process.
Right.
It's not required. You have to trust a system, trust your school, trust your teacher, and let the system evolve. Things will fall in place. So I think we just need to allow a little bit of maturity, especially as parental fraternity and people who uninvitedly audit schools. There are enough uninvited auditors of schools, the teaching process. It's not required. They are qualified to do their job. Let them do it. That's my submission actually.
Do you think all learning gaps have long term impact?
Some have. Technical, for example, if you have learned to stand in a particular stance as a batsman, and that is an incorrect stance, you will grow with that. Areas like that, if nobody has rectified it, it can have a long term effect, and then to correct it can take a lot of time. So, technical linked areas, the way you hold an instrument, the way you hold something when you play, if your grip is wrong, it can take a lot of time to correct it, or your action to bowl is wrong. All of these lead to a lot of time that is required for rectification. Unfortunately, where we look at learning gaps, which is why I'm consciously not coming into it, is only academic learning gap versus syllabus. That's what the whole world tries to focus on, or at least we try to focus on here. Don't worry about it. A vast majority of the children today who excel in this world sometimes don't even attend school till 5th standard or 6th standard, or late learners, have read in a particular medium till a particular age, have switched mediums at another age. Are those not learning gaps? Have they not bridged it over a period of time? So, where were we addressing learning gap before the pandemic then for those people? We have lakhs of people across the world who are out of school students. Is that not a learning gap issue? So I think we are okay as a world. And the more we underplay these and just concentrate on what needs to be done, progress will automatically be achieved.
So, my next question is to you. Should one always be judgmental about learning gaps?
Well, uh, basically, with or without the learning cap, I always recommend that we should never be judgmental about either about learning or the learner, right? Because learning is absolutely contextual, right? So the context of the society, the context of the community, the context of the resources, the context of family support, so many things lead to the process of learning, and therefore to say that a particular individual is a good learner, what is fast learner, slow learner, these are all the judgments given by a teacher, because we all want the children to be put into the same norm, same yardstick, right? Unfortunately, no two human beings learn the same way, the same level. It varies. So we should be able to appreciate the learning behavior of each individual, and therefore support him to follow his own learning curve and maximize his learning, right? And most problems come with either within the family, within brothers, within a school system, when we try to judge people. Oh, he has got good marks in mathematics. What difference does it make between 99 and 98 in mathematics over that? People don't have a mathematical thinking, but they get mathematics marks. Don't have a scientific temper, but they get 100 out of 100 in science. So all these things very indicate that being judgmental is a matter of convenience. It is only to bring the forced order into existential disorder.
What would you have to add to that?
Oh, I think I have really nothing to add. He's put it so beautifully. Uh, I just think, in a very, very simple way, if you look at a child, especially when we are looking at school education and stuff like that, we do not give them the room that we actually expect as adults. We stifle them with our judgments. We don't realize that our judgments become their walls. Our judgments become their chains. Our judgments become their limitations. You can really kill a potential child by giving 3 judgments which dents the child's confidence about himself or herself. And if you just keep telling a child, no, 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 you keep quiet, you don't know how to talk, you keep quiet, you may have killed a news anchor in the making. So I think allowing people to blossom
True.
with their mistakes, with their quirks, with their disorders is perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine. I think we need to, he put it so beautifully. I mean, learning gap or not judgments is bad. So we don't realize the repercussions that it can create. People offering judgments offer it with good intent. I'm not for a moment questioning the intent behind the judgments, but you are not thinking through what your judgment can do to the psychology of the recipient of that judgment. It can shake someone's, confidence.
Basic confidence.
Yeah.
What we define as quirks can actually become a unique selling point for the person.
The flip side of
Right.
quirk is unique.
Yeah.
So how do you, define? Would Steve Jobs have been celebrated as a unique thinker? Had he been a failure, he would have been called a quirk. So, unfortunately, we attribute adjectives based on the amount of success. It's like a famous line that I've heard somewhere, and the same thing measures in equal manner everywhere. You kill a man, you are called a murderer. You kill a million, you are called a conqueror. It's a telling statement. Similarly with quirks, you make small mistakes, you are called a failure. You make giant mistakes, you are called an innovator. So it is a funny world that we live in. You've got to allow people to do it.
All right. Thank you both so much for joining us on this discussion here today. Dear teachers, educators, parents, do not panic if you think there is a learning gap. Do not allow yourselves to feel that fear, and do not push that fear onto the children. At the end of the day, what we need to remember is that children are always curious, and like we always say, they are like sponges. They are able to absorb and learn a lot around them very quickly. So even if there is a gap, they will quickly bridge it and they will be able to get over any gaps that are present. Thank you so much for joining us here today, and join us in the next episode of Bala and Bala Perspectives on Education. You take care.